Awesome. All right. You ready to do it?
Yeah.
All right. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Beth Tyson. Beth, welcome.
Thank you so much. I am honored to be here.
All right, here we go. So Beth is a psychotherapist, a childhood grief and trauma expert, and a children's book author. She earned several years of experience as a clinician working with children and families, and as a teaching assistant in the graduate program for counseling psychology at Eastern University. While practicing as a trauma therapist within the child welfare system, Beth earned her certificate in adoption from Rutgers University. She's a CASA volunteer and a Voices for Children Coalition partner, advocating for youth in the foster care system in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. Beth uses her expertise in childhood trauma to help families and organizations operate from a trauma-sensitive and healing-centered approach. She helps her clients understand the biological impact of trauma on the brain and autonomic nervous system. All right. Obviously, just a little bit about you, Beth, but welcome. Before we get going here, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently, and we'll get going.
Sure. I am originally from the heavenly state of Maine.
Nice.
Yeah, I long to get back there. I try to visit as much as I can, which isn't very often. But yes, I'm a maniac.
So, okay. And before we started recording, you shared that currently you're in Pennsylvania.
Yes, just outside of Philadelphia.
Okay. Why'd you move?
I moved, we moved when I was about 12 to South Jersey, just outside of Philadelphia. My mom wanted to be closer to her family. So, and I think the economy up there was struggling. So we moved south to, just get a change of scenery and be closer to family. Yeah.
But you want to get back to Maine.
Yes, I miss
do.
it. I don't know if I'm going to live there. It's a little cold for me these days. But I do love to visit. So, yeah.
Awesome. All right, let's dive in here. So how the heck did you get started in this field?
Yeah, sure. So I've always been interested in psychology, and it was just naturally something I was drawn to. As I went through undergrad, I couldn't pick a major. I was having such a hard time choosing what I wanted to major in. And I remember the counselor saying, well, let's see, you have you almost have your degree in psychology and you didn't even realize it, kind of thing. And I was like, wow, that's what I'm really naturally interested in. So let's go in that direction. And then I ended up with a communications degree of all things, but with a minor in psychology. And then when I went into the workforce, I just went into business because that's kind of what everybody was doing at that point. It was like, oh, get a job in a good company, benefits, and, the whole thing. And that was fine, but I just felt really unfulfilled. And then in 2005, my mom passed away suddenly one night in her sleep. And I just realized, wow, life is so short. I really need to do, or it can be so short. I really need to find what I'm passionate about. I'm going to spend most of my time at a job doing this for the rest of my life. So I might as well do something I really love and I'm passionate about. And again, that search and that journey took me again to psychology. And so I went back when I was in my early 30s for my degree in counseling psychology. And so that is how I ended up here. And I think I've just always really wanted to understand people. Especially after my mom passed, I wanted to understand myself and my own grieving process and what I was going through. And then I wanted to take what I experienced through that trauma and that grief of losing my mom suddenly and use it to help other people who were going through something similar. So it was kind of twofold, the reason why, I got into this field. Really just wanting to understand myself and others and then use that to help somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I'm sorry to hear about your mom. My mother passed away suddenly too, a few years ago. How did you, it's such a big question. How did you work through that? You talked about kind of understanding yourself and the grief process. What was that like for you?
Yeah, it's an ongoing process, I would say. It changes and it shifts over time, but I still consider myself to be in the grieving process. I think I will be for the rest of my life. When you lose your mom, it's not anything you can really prepare yourself for. And there's just so many moments throughout time that you wish that she were there. And so, with each one of those moments, like all the grief comes back up. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that how I got through it back then was a little bit of medication, definitely, but also psychotherapy, going to see someone in therapy, and then family and friends, and just really, I had kind of like, I feel like it was kind of an awakening for me, because that was when I realized, like, wow, uh, I don't want to miss out on so many things in life. So I do think I had a bit of like post traumatic growth from that experience, where at first it was really, really hard and I had a lot of anxiety. And what people sometimes don't realize is how much anxiety comes along with grief. I think oftentimes we think of grief as just like sadness and crying, or, depression. But there's also a lot of anxiety that comes up with grief, because it calls into question like your existential questions. It calls into question like, your meaning in life and your purpose in life and how long we all have here. So I think, yeah, I think that experience was an awakening for me to like go out there and do all the things that I really want to do and really am finding my passion about. So
Yeah, and you talked about wanting to take that experience and kind of help others. What was that process like for you? What did you say to yourself? I'm going through this process. This sucks, but I want to help other people. Lead us through that, if you will.
yeah, sure. So I think, I made some mistakes right after my mom passed away. I got into some relationships that weren't healthy, and I just was kind of fumbling through and sort of trying to replace or like fill up the pain that I was feeling with relationships. And um that ended up just being, they were they were good relationships in a lot of ways, and they really supported me through what I was going through. But when like the dust settled, I realized that I had kind of just tried to fill up my empty heart, or like my broken heart, with people and relationships that might not be serving me. And so, going back to graduate school and getting my degree in counseling was definitely part of my healing process, because I went to school, and when you're in those programs, you're learning so much about yourself as you are about other people. In fact, I feel like the program I went through, which was phenomenal at Eastern University, really focused on knowing yourself so
Wow.
much, so much more deeply, so that you can then help other people.
What
Because
what program was that? Just for my own edification.
it's the master's in clinical counseling at Eastern University. And I believe now they have like an online program, but when I went, it was fully on campus, in person.
Uh,
And they really helped you do a lot of self discovery, so
mm.
that your own stuff wouldn't get in the way of being a good therapist or effective therapist. And so you could kind of feel out your own blind spots, so that you didn't inadvertently put your own.
That's the hope.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think they did a great job with that. Of course, there's always blind spots, right?
Yeah.
nobody nobody is able to find all of them, but I think that through that process, that really helped me heal. Sorry, my daughter just.
No worries.
um,
Hey.
so anyway, it was really that whole, going to school really helped me understand myself better and find coping skills and things that I might not have had. So um, indirectly, it was, I think, part of my healing process. And also writing. I started like this online journal for my mom. It was like a grief website where you could like set up almost like a tribute to your lost loved ones, and it was a place people could come and leave messages and
Mm.
light a candle, or do all these little symbolic things. And I started writing to her as though I was writing to her. Like
Right, right.
I started writing these messages and these journal entries that, I felt like were messages out to her, in heaven. And that helped me tremendously through
Wow.
the grieving process. And people would leave comments and say that they missed her and things like that, and it just really helped me cope with what I was going through. So I'm sure there's other similar things out there still like this. This was
Hmm.
15 years ago, so.
Hmm. So
So
what was your book about?
Oh, so the book I wrote, so it's kind of taking me on a different journey here. So after I got my degree in counseling, I had the opportunity to take a position with an organization, and what they do is they help families who are struggling with mental health issues. And so I became an in-home therapist for foster, kinship, and adoptive families.
Wow.
And in all of those families were dealing with trauma. Absolutely trauma and comorbid diagnoses of all different types of things going on. Really, families that are in crisis. And oftentimes the children were about to be removed from their foster home or their kinship home or their adoptive home because of behavioral challenges. And it was my role to come in as like a Hail Mary at the last second, because we don't do a lot of preventative work in
Right.
mental health care, right? We're always like coming in at the last second to try and save things, but not because we want to, but because that's just the way the system works. So it was my job to keep these placements in place and stabilize the families, which was hard to do when you're fresh out of grad school. But I loved it. I fell in love with the work. I had tremendous success, which I did not expect to have. I so much of what I do, and especially in the beginning, you want to talk about mistakes, was this imposter syndrome that you feel when you first become a therapist, and when you're in training, it's like, who am I to have this honor and this responsibility of like helping these people through such difficult challenges. But I was able to work through that, and I just saw so much hope in these families that had so much pain, and it was inspiring beyond measure for me.
Can we dial in and maybe share a specific experience, obviously without, disclosing any intimate details, but I'd be interested to hear what one of those experiences looked like for you. What was it like for you?
Yeah, so oftentimes my work in the family was like, it was almost mandated, right? So nobody was, not nobody, but majority of people were not asking for me to come into their home. It was like the social worker said, you have to have this person here. So that was a challenge of itself, like just
Right.
earning trust and earning respect from the family, and being able to establish that therapeutic alliance with people who really are like sick of people coming into their house, which I get. When you are a foster parent, you have oftentimes a lot of services and people coming to your house, kind of telling you what to do, and
Right.
this, that, and the other thing, and it's overwhelming, the appointments that these
So
foster kids.
you're fresh out of grad school.
Yeah.
This is I've worked in that environment, and it's really, really tough working with foster kids and everything you're saying, all those challenges. So how did you navigate those waters about earning trust and so forth? What did you do
Yeah,
and not do?
um, the way I approached it, it was like, first building that trust, like showing them that I am there for them to help them, that just being genuine and being myself. I take the perspective that I am not the expert on anybody's family. You are the expert on your family. I'm just there to be like a guide, and a safe place to share your feelings, and hopefully, I may be able to have a perspective that you don't, that might be helpful. But like, I'm not the expert. I'm not going to come in and tell you what you should be doing in your home. And I think that disarms a lot of people, that they don't,
Right.
they don't. And not only that, but I was a young, woman with no children at that time. So even a bigger thing, oh, this woman with no children is going to come in and tell me I've been doing this for 30 years or 20 years or whatever it was. So it was a big ask, and for some reason I just started with the relationship. I took my ego out of it as much as I could, and
So you started out from that position. I mean, that is really admirable, because it's very easy to come out of school, right? You've got this knowledge, you've got this degree, you to a certain extent, you're an expert. And it's very easy, even humbly, to come into a position like that, thinking that you know more. But what
Mhm.
you're saying is you didn't really do that. You did really what it sounds like you're supposed to do.
Yes.
That is awesome.
Thank you. I again attribute that back to my program and the work that I did at Eastern because, well, some of it's my personality. So when I was in training, when I was in my practicum, I like one day, I guess it was when I probably had my first like practice client. I came into the classroom and I was just like sobbing, like, oh my God, I just messed this up terribly. It was awful. I said the wrong thing. I'm not going to be able to help anybody. I just kind of was like beating myself up pretty harshly. And the graduate assistant for the practicum part of the training was like, listen, I've watched you in class. I've seen you practice. Like, you're doing great. Like, you have to allow yourself to be a beginner. It is very hard to do, but you have to allow yourself to be new at something when you're becoming a therapist and feel the pains, the aches and pains of that beginner phase. And then when I talked to my supervisor, she was like, you, and this is and my supervisor, my clinical supervisor at Eastern, not at my job. She was like, if you didn't feel worried about how you're doing at this stage, then I would be concerned. She was like, the fact that you are reflecting on yourself and feeling not good enough right now is exactly where we want you to be. Because if you were too overconfident, that's when you could do harm. If you think you know it all and you think you're, going to intervene with all these different, skills and concepts, and you overstep, that's actually when you can do harm to clients when you're fresh out of school. So I don't know. It was a combination of just accepting that, like really accepting the pain of being a beginner at something.
All right. So you said you really relied on the being genuine and who you were to build that trust and so forth. So I want to continue, if we can dial it in, and what was one of those experiences like for you? Can we flesh it out a little more?
Sure. I'm trying to just scan through my brain to pick one that there's a couple that really just stand out to me, that I still think about them. I wish I could keep in touch with them and see how they're doing nowadays. But so, I had this one. It was a grand family, a kinship family, which is, you asked me what I wrote my book about. That's what I ended up writing the book about, was about kinship families, grandparents raising grandchildren. And um, it was this kinship family that was, burnt out. There was a lot of explosive behaviors going on with the child, a lot of avoidance, you know, defiance, disrespect. He was an adolescent, so that's a tough age as it is, and would refuse to meet with me. Like, he just flat out refused to meet with me. And this is also what has inspired some more of my work, which I'll explain in a minute. But so I said, you know what? I'm going to meet this family where they are. Instead of insisting that this child sit there with me and like play a game and force him through it, I said, you know what? Clearly that's not going to work this time. I need to just do the most with what I have. So I was able to build a relationship with the grandmother. And I did that by just letting her vent. She just had so much pressure on her and she was so overwhelmed, and her retirement years had been taken from her, she felt, and she just was in a world of pain. And so I started with grandma. I was technically there to do more work with the child, but I quickly realized that I could help this child more if I help grandma. And so I spent my weeks coming to meet with her, and the
Oh,
child would see me and he'd take off down the street on his bike when he saw me pull up, and I would go and I'd meet with grandma every week. And little by little, he ended up, because he needed to trust me too, right?
right.
So little by little, he saw that I kept coming and I kept coming. I kept talking with grandma. And then he eventually would sit down at the table with us and,
Wow.
play a game, or, and so he had to see that someone else in the house trusted me, I think, before he was going to engage. So it can be a very slow process in making small steps, and that's okay
Mhm,
too.
mhm.
It's not always this great, big impact
Right.
that you come in and make. Although in this case, it did turn out to be that way because I was able to get, once I built such a strong relationship with the grandmother, um, then I was able to get the grandfather at the table to hear
Right.
about trauma and how
Wow.
trauma impacts children, and how, this child is not just misbehaving or being defiant, but there's actual changes that are
Hmm.
happening in his body when he's being triggered or when he hasn't processed something he's been through, and was able to do so much great work with them. So
Wow. Thanks so much for sharing that. And also, I like what you said about, making kind of like this big shift. And oftentimes it's like what is might be considered a big shift to the therapist, or a small shift to the therapist is oftentimes can be a big shift for the client, right? Just that going back time after time and time again and sitting down, establishing that consistency and that trust and that relationship might could seem mundane for a therapist because they want to get in there and use these interventions, but it's just so true. That's an awesome story. Thank you.
thank you. Yeah, it was really meaningful. And she ended up sending me a card like after we were done with our sessions, just saying like how much it had been a help to her and all this stuff. And I really did very little work with the child, but I was, that's the thing I feel like strongly about, is that a lot of times when there's a child with behavioral problems, we take them out of the family and put them into therapy with somebody else and try to work on the issues removed from the family. And it's almost like counterintuitive in some ways.
Hmm.
I think that you need to work with the parents, because, or the caregivers, because the caregivers are in the lives of the children every single day. And if you can help them with some skills and help them bring down some of their anxiety, and help them to regulate their emotions, then that trickles down to the child, and kind of helps things even out a bit.
Right, right.
So I found the most impact I could make was with parents and
Hmm.
caregivers. Um,
So, all right, having said all that, what would you share as kind of an early clinical error?
So early clinical error was, well, one was the feeling like a failure, that that feeling of, oh, I shouldn't have done this, I'm in the wrong profession, because I was feeling so like new and fresh at it and not feeling good enough. And I say that as a mistake because of the way it was reframed by my professor and my teaching assistant, that like, no, this is actually exactly the way you should feel right now. So I
Hmm.
want to encourage people that if you're out there and you're new at this and you're feeling like you shouldn't be, that you're not good enough or you're not worthy of the role that you have, I just want to encourage you that that's, in the beginning, that's exactly how you should feel.
I like
um,
that. Yeah.
yeah. And so on the other hand, you know, what we do is like an art form in a way. And I think that as as when you look at it that way, we want to do the art part of it. We want to do the hands-on work, the therapy. But oftentimes I had a real hard time making the documentation a priority. And so, I didn't realize early on that documentation is like, can be like 40% of your role
Mhm.
as a therapist, and how important it is to have everything documented so that you have all your bases covered. And so there was a lot of times in my early days when I would be late, with a documentation, or I would not have written up something that I was supposed to do, or get a signature that I was supposed to have. And I got written up early on in my career, and I was like devastated because I'm a recovering perfectionist, I guess, these days. And so I just couldn't believe I was written up at
Right.
work or
Right.
something. Like, oh my gosh. And one of my instincts when I feel shame like that, when I am feeling ashamed of my behavior for whatever reason, is to want to like cut and run, like
Mm.
just okay, I screwed up. I got to get out of here. Or this relationship must be over now because I made a mistake. And what I learned through that experience of being written up and making those mistakes was that my coworkers forgave me. My supervisor forgave me. I stuck it out through that awkwardness And that shame of like, oh my gosh, I screwed up. Now I'm going to be the bad employee was like was what I was thinking. And what turned out was like they got over it and it was not a big deal. And
Right.
I was able to maintain those relationships and they grew from there. And so it wasn't like, it was such a professional learning experience for me of like, just because you make a mistake doesn't mean that your supervisor is never going to respect you again or is never going to look at you as competent again. Like that all or nothing thinking is
Mm-hmm.
not accurate. And
Right.
so yeah, I was able to sort of forgive myself and move on.
I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think throughout this whole interview, you've really shared a lot of your own story, but so much of it I think is really applicable and helpful for people listening to this podcast, whether they're just starting out or whether they're seasoned as well. Let me ask you something. You strike me as, I mean, not, I don't know if you strike me, but you are obviously someone who's had a lot of varied experiences and you're putting a lot of passion in your work. What, Beth, do you feel is like your mission in this work?
Mm. My mission in the work is that, wow, I just, I feel like I have so much, have gained like so much knowledge and awareness of pain that is taking place between adults and children that doesn't need to exist if we could shift the paradigm, right? So like, so I did so much of my work is educating people about trauma so that they understand why the behavior is happening and what they can do differently to make things, operate more smoothly in their lives and in their families. And I really want to help educate parents so that I can reach the children that way, because those are the most critical relationships, the parent child attachment and that dynamic and that relationship between the two of them, though that is the most crucial relationship, not the relationship a child has with a therapist. So I feel that my mission is to share the knowledge that I have. I don't know it all. I'm still figuring it out myself, but I have had some experiences where the mainstream type of parenting that people do is really like not helpful to children a lot of times. And if we could just shift things a little bit, it's not even a big shift, it's just a small shift that people can make to being more understanding and empathizing with children instead of trying to stamp out their feelings. I guess one thing I'm really big about is just that um allowing children to have their feelings and not trying to come in to rescue them all the time or come in to, take their pain away or stop their emotional reactions, which I know is an instinct. As a parent, I feel that too. I struggle with it every day. But allowing space for a child to have their big emotions and just be present with it, sitting with it, and saying, I can accept that even if I don't understand what you're going through or understand why you're throwing a tantrum or understand why you're crying because you dropped the Cheerio, like I'm still here and I'm present and I can see that you're upset. And I think too many times we don't let children have their feelings, especially if they don't fit into like a stereotypical gender role too, so like boys don't cry and girls don't get angry, just
Right.
as an example. And it's like, no, girls do get angry and boys should be allowed to cry. Like you're allowed to have the full spectrum of the human experience because you are a human.
Right.
And a lot of times I just see that in like the everyday parenting I come across where we're trying to like stamp out feelings instead of
Mm-hmm.
accepting them.
Yeah, this is a great topic, and I think it's a great topic for another episode, another interview. And I'd love to bring you back to flush that out if you'd be willing.
Absolutely.
Awesome, awesome. All right, so let's wind down here. Before we go, and before I ask you about a go-to book recommendation, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Sure. You can find me on my website, bethtyson.com. That's BETHTYSON.
Okay.
And I also have a free private Facebook group called Emotominds, which is for the emotional well-being of families. So I talk about trauma on there. I have a lot of people who are raising children impacted by trauma, and just general mental health and well-being for kids and families, and sort of doing that educational piece. I'm sharing any experience I have. I also share my own struggles on there and things, and ask questions to people,
Okay.
to help me out when I'm stuck, because a lot of times I feel like people think therapists like have it
Yep.
all figured out or something, and we're just like everybody else.
So that is, how do you spell that? Emotominds.
Emotominds, it's like emotion and minds together. EMOTIMINDS.
Got it. Okay. We'll include
Like
that.
a educational space for understanding mental health within our families.
Awesome. Okay. Okay. I'll have those links here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. All right. So closing out, a go-to book recommendation from you, whether trauma related or not.
Yeah. So I know I'm not supposed to mention my book, but
Oh, no,
I
no.
think you wanted me to mention it earlier and I didn't get to it. So I'll just throw it out there that if you're in the foster or kinship space, I published a book called A Grand Family for Sullivan, and it's available on Amazon. So there's that, and there's coping skills for children in there who have experienced loss and trauma, and also guidance for caregivers of
Awesome.
children who have lost, who have been through separation from their biological families. Anywho, but my book recommendation beyond that, sorry, is, so I read every morning. I read this book. It's called A Daily Dose of Sanity by Alan Cohen. And I love this book because it's one-page entries. It's like almost like a devotional, if you know what that is, but it's not denominational, it's not Christian, it's not anything. It's just like little life lessons in one page, one page length. And so it's so inspiring. And I feel like every single time I read an entry, it's every day of the year, 365 days. Every time I read something, it just enlightens me in a way that I wouldn't expect, or it's a message I needed to hear that day, or it inspires me in some way. And it's become a ritual. I think rituals are really helpful for our mental health. So I read it every day, or I read it at night before bed, and it's
Very cool. So
yeah.
A Daily Dose of Sanity, a 5-minute soul recharge for every day of the year by Alan Cohen. Awesome. And your book, A Grand Family for Sullivan. Again, we'll have those linked up at the show notes page. Beth, you are awesome. I love talking to you. And again, like I said, I'd love to have you back to talk specifically about that topic about kids and families and parents rather, and kids and big emotions. Awesome. I love what you're doing, and can't wait to get this out there.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And really, I'm an honor to be here. So thank you.
I appreciate that. All right. Take care.
All right. Bye.